Let's talk about borrowing costs and the amount of debt. We do know Canadians are grappling with record levels of household debt. It's becoming a more frequent complication, though, for couples who want to separate or get divorced. Some details on what you need to know about how debt is treated in those situations. Family lawyer at Shulman Law Firm, Diana Isaac, joins us now. Thanks for joining us, Diana.
It's great to be here.
So I'm wondering, in your practice, what you've seen in recent years. If the debt loads, as we know, are getting bigger and bigger and bigger, it would seem to be a complication if people want to split up and they're still carrying a lot of debt.
Yes, at Shulman Law Firm, we've noticed that this is one of the biggest issues. More and more parties that are separating are leaving their relationship or marriage with significant debt and no assets. So this is quite concerning and alarming because people are left with a huge debt load, and now they only have one income to tackle this debt instead of having two.
Now, one would think, and this is probably from just growing up watching American TV shows and not having any legal background myself, okay, we separated, we split things up 50-50, but it's not that simple, and it's from province to province, I understand, it is also different in terms of the rules.
It does vary. In Ontario, there is no division of debt. So there's no such concept as family debt. When people come into a marriage or they have a common law relationship and they're separating, each of them will be responsible for their respective debt. So let's say someone has a credit card debt of $1,000 and the other has a $30,000 car loan. They're going to be responsible for those debts accordingly and respectively. And there's other provinces and territories, such as, let's say, British Columbia, that is starkly different from Ontario, whereby they divide debt equally. Saskatchewan is a bit more comparable to Ontario, whereby title will dictate who's responsible for the debt.
So that credit card was in your name, you ran it up, and guess what? That's your debt to take with you.
Unfortunately.
Into your new life. What about households? I'm thinking in terms of big urban centers that have seen a huge run-up. And when I bought the last house that I'm in 11 years ago, I thought whatever debt we were taking on in the mortgage there was big. It doesn't even compare to what young people are taking on now. Some of them might have $700,000, $800,000, $900,000 mortgages, and then they split. What happens?
The interesting situation is, again, in Ontario, what we notice is that whoever's on record of that debt is responsible for that debt. So the way and the easiest way of looking at this is to say a creditor, the only obligation they have is to go after the person who they have made that contract with, signed that debt with.
In terms, too, I was wondering, when people are in the middle of a breakdown and they haven't gotten all the way to divorce or separation, if they start making moves to try to either push the debt on the other person, is this the kind of stuff, once it ends up before a judge or an arbitration, that's going to be taken to a fact that if you made some shady moves ahead, anticipating the complete destruction of your relationship?
Yeah, there are exceptions to the rules. So if someone is trying to recklessly deplete, or there's issues with how they want to deal with the debt in order to shelter certain assets, or in a sense to increase certain debts, there are ways we would deal with it, of course, and it would require, in most cases, court intervention.
At the beginning, we laid out a scenario where you have big debt but no assets, but at some point, maybe people who've been in a relationship for a long time, there are some assets. So what becomes the process then, generally speaking, in terms of, okay, there's this many liabilities, but you actually do have some assets? Do you have to just, is it a foregone conclusion that you're going to have to liquidate, maybe sell the house?
So in Ontario, when parties are legally married, what happens is when they have assets, let's say both of the parties have assets and both of them have debts, what happens is the debt is considered when they have assets. So it really, what you end up seeing is that there is a debt that is offset from the asset, and it's used to calculate what we call their net family property.
In terms of when you're at the situation, it's an ugly situation to begin in the first place. Does this become the ugliest part of the process when the debts are laid on the table and then lawyers are facing off against each other and the people on the other side of the table? And is this the most contentious issue you find these days?
I find in my experience that the issues are compounded when there's a lot of debt, because people are at a point where they're trying to figure fiscally what makes sense post-separation. How am I going to survive this? How am I going to move on? Especially when you're dealing with gray divorces. The nest egg is very limited, so people need to, which is something I recommend a lot, you need to speak to a financial advisor in order to determine how the separation is going to impact your financial future.
All right, fascinating stuff. Thanks for joining us and walking us through it.
Thank you.
It was Diana Isaac, family lawyer at Shulman Law Firm.